you for putting me on the agenda right after Anthony read it. That was tremendous, tremendous presentation. I'm not even going to try. Okay. So what Jim mentioned is interesting. I want to thank him and Kurt Rasky, who's one of the organizing members, also a member of that team that we had back then, for inviting me here to speak. It's been quite a bit of time since I've spoke directly to the community of project management. See, I got involved in some work that was basically described as enabling engineering teams and marketing teams and their managers to make decisions based on fact rather than assumptions and guesses and wishful thinking. Turns out there's a lot of work to do there. You know, I can stay pretty busy doing that. And so, in preparing for this, I updated him and Kurt on what I was working on, and he says, well, I think the project people ought to hear about this. I said, I'm not sure, but let's see if I still understand your situation, perhaps. You got a new project, right? Someone comes in the door, they've got, hey, we got a great new idea. Here's all the things it needs to do, right? And we call it scope, you know, we give it names, but basically, here's what we want to do. And so you take that out to all the resource managers, right? You say, what do you got to do and how much is it going to take to do this? Basic process, right? Because your job is to come up with a plan you can get approved. And that's the plan you're going to manage to. So you take it to them and they look at it and, okay, this is not their first rodeo. They're not stupid. They look at it and they go, okay. So they pad their schedule, right? All right. You're not stupid. It's not your schedule. You pad the schedule some more. You pad the resource budget some more. And then you put it all together and it's too long and too expensive to get it approved. Now, marketing sees that this is going to take longer and cost more than they'd hoped, so they don't have enough revenue in the plan, right? Their product plan. So they add some more scope and features in there to justify up in the revenue forecast. They're not stupid. Okay. But of course, the CFO's not stupid either. It's not his first rodeo, so he's taking judgment against that already in the forecast lines. That ever happen? Right? So, in order to get this thing approved, you go through a little roundabout, right? Multiple times, you go back and you renegotiate. And so what people start saying, well, if this works out that way and so delivers this on time and that doesn't change, then we could possibly get it into this period of time. And you go through this process time and time again, and finally you get something that you can get approved. Now, it's got all these if-then assumptions in it, but when that plan rolls off the printer, if you didn't print it anymore, it comes out with all the indelibility of having been engraved in stone on the summit of Mount Sinai, right? And where are all those assumptions? They're nowhere to be found. All right, they just disappear. You start work dutifully bound to deliver on time, and then the scope changes. And then all those if-thens don't happen, right? The risks become real that are embedded in there, and things get late, and the schedule and budget get blown, and you start revising the plan, and your management wants you to get it finished because they've already decided to start the next one. Can anybody relate to that? All right, I'm talking to the right set of folks here. What we're going to do today is I want to explore this dynamic a little bit and how it happens. It turns out that after I retired from TI, I was still involved in product development improvement. And I met a fella on the golf course, the former TI, his name's Michael Kennedy. And he knew I was interested in product development. He was too. And he kept telling me, look, I've been talking to this fellow named Dr. Alec Ward at the University of Michigan. He's an expert on Toyota. And he just recently died in a plane crash when we met. And he said, Alan was telling me that there's a way you could look at all the alternatives that are out there, keep them alive as long as possible, don't eliminate any of them, and you can get it done in half the time with half the budget. Well, being a former engineering manager, my response to that was profoundly negative. So, but Michael was persistent. He insisted there's a way to do it. I couldn't get around to golfing peacefully. So I decided to prove him wrong. I sat down in my home office and I said, I'm going to design a product the way he thinks it ought to be done and just show him it can't be done. After about a week, I wasn't feeling too good. In fact, it kind of had a sour taste in my mouth. Kind of like throat. And it turns out it can be done. And I'll share a little bit about how that happens and why it works. But mainly it has a lot to do with this dynamic here. And the interesting thing, this dynamic, the response of the Senior Vice President of Boston Scientific does heart patient machine. He probably eloquently described it as, how can so many individually intelligent people collectively act so stupid? That's a pretty interesting conversation. Oh, by the way, if you have a question along the way, I prefer dialogue to sermonizing. It's tough to do in this size audience, but if you can get my attention, we'll make a try at it, okay? So I want to talk about the decisions being made in projects, okay? And it's centered mainly around, I work in product development, but what we found is this applies not only to product development, not only to projects, but pretty much in just about every situation where there's a high degree of uncertainty and a lot of trade-offs to be made. Okay. And we want to discuss what's happening there, strategy being used in engineering over the last couple of decades, how that's starting to evolve into the project planning world. Okay. And so this is kind of, I'm not going to be able to give you a lot of how-tos. This is kind of alerting you to maybe something that's emerging that you might want to pay attention to as it comes out and moves along. And then whether this works out or not, I think I've got a few takeaways for you that you can apply that will help you out in this dynamic, make it something useful. So let's talk a little bit about how decisions are currently getting made. Jim went through the history there quite eloquently. I didn't know that he prepared to do that. But one of the things that Jim was instrumental in creating, Jim Zotten along with Kurt Rasky, was that after, we made, with the help of Delco, a discovery that little project management was a good thing. We decided to create a program manager development center. We call it program manager because that sounded better than project manager and get people to come to it, right? And we discovered some things, a lot of things. Here's a couple of them. One is that there was very little correlation between a project manager's personality type and their success. I like that one because it gave me hope, okay? The other one is we tested against the PMI PMBOK, done 360 performance assessments and all that. And while all that stuff about Gantt charts and CPMs and earned value and all that stuff was helpful to the project manager, there wasn't a lot of correlation with project success. Something else was dominating our project performance, if you will. It wasn't just about being able to make good schedules or good plans or whatever. So let's fast forward a decade. I've retired from Texas Instruments. I'm out doing this on my own. And for 2 decades, people have been putting in phase or stage gate processes. How many here is a company that's involved in product development has some type of formal stage gate process? Maybe I ought to ask anybody that doesn't. because I think it's pretty universal. And there's a whole history behind that. And there's also now system engineering processes in project management, total quality management. And a decade after everybody was implementing that, guess what? We still got half the projects having big schedule delays and cost overruns, and rework, firefighting consuming 50 to 70% of the resources. And I saw some statistics in some of the presentations earlier that hadn't changed much here in 2022. That's still some of the stats some folks were showing in other presentations. There's a lot of that going on. Why do these issues still exist at a significant level? Okay. What Michael and I went off and studied is that looking into the root causes of it, up here in the early part of projects, there's a lot of decisions being made. Tremendous amount of decisions. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But they're being made before there's knowledge of the facts and the consequences of those decisions. And we're not finding out about them until we get down here. That's when they find out the decisions we made up here weren't best. And that's why we've got to go back and adjust. Okay. And the thing that we also find is that your stage gate, phase gate processes are actually encouraging that behavior. In fact, they often dictate that behavior. I see some nods there. Someone's already seen where I'm going. So that puts us in a very peculiar position. In order to get a project plan to design a new product approved, we actually have to design the product. We have to design the product before we get the plan to design the product approved. What do I mean by that? Up here at the beginning, we've got all these requirements, goals, scope sheets, and all that come in. There are technical decisions to be made up there by the people that have to perform the work. How am I going to do it? What materials am I going to use? So forth and so on. All that to make some decisions about the cost and profitability. And if they're making those decisions based on assumptions and unproven hypotheses and opinions and guesses, guess where that flows into? Your scope, your schedule, your resources, right? So that uncertainty doesn't cancel out. In fact, it multiplies as it gets through there. What is actually more determinant in how well you can make a schedule is that the quality of the decisions that ultimately determine the value to the customer, the value to the company, and the risk are more determinant of success than pretty much anything else you can do. Have I lost anybody yet? Okay. So what are these decisions I'm talking about? We don't think of these things as decisions. We think of them as documents and forms and statements that we have to fill out to get the project approved. And eventually to execute the project. But for everything in a requirements document, everything on an engineering drawing, everything on a bill of materials, everything on a process sheet, every subroutine chosen to be standard object code chosen to be in a piece of software, what tasks you do, when you'll start, and when you'll end them, what resources you need. Someone has made a decision about that. Those things that go into those forms are decisions that have been completed. Where in your forms are the alternatives that were also considered and what the consequences of all those different alternatives were.
Takes too much time.
Darn it, there's that time. It could take years and cost thousands of lives to actually get all that, right? Well, that's what I told Michael, the engineer, there's no way you can do all that, right? Impossible to do all that. You can't do it. The really terrible thing is that these things are not independent of each other, right? They are tightly interwoven together. And when you start making decisions about one, you're actually making decisions about another in some way. And so we're going to explore that dynamic and what's going on there. Why do these decisions not work out for us? Well, one reason is what we call knowledge gaps. A knowledge gaps is where we're making a decision and we don't really have the facts. Right? We're making it off assumptions, unproven hypotheses, guesses, wishful thinking. If you study the psychology of problem solving or go look into it, they'll say one of the most common reasons people fail in solving complex problems is that they confuse having a hypothesis of a solution with having a solution. In other words, when you say, how are we going to solve that? We'll get a plan on how we're going to go to it. But we don't necessarily have proof that that will work. Right? So if we're doing that, they kind of come in three flavors. Things to do with what we really understand about the customer and business interests. I don't know, you probably encounter this a lot, right? Pretty typical is, if you're in a commercial business, it's marketing. If you're in some type of contract business, there's someone on the other end that's kind of acting as marketing and is going out to the customer organization and say, what do you need? And they bind that all up into a big requirements document. And to make it appealing, every wish that everybody wants gets included, right? But what do they truly do, right? And how does it truly work? The other thing is, what are our true capabilities? Do we know the limits of our technologies? Do we know are the limits of our resources and skill sets? Do we know the limits of our financial situation? What are we truly capable of delivering? And between the two of them, there's a whole network of trade-offs based on the decisions that we make about these two things here. One of the things I'd like you to consider is that requirements are not requirements. Requirements are decisions that you make. You have the choice to say no. You have the alternative to saying no. You have the alternative to negotiate. You have the alternative to set different targets. Okay. And once you surrender, that to saying it must be this, you have really made life much more difficult for yourself than it needs to be. And some investigation into how those requirement documents actually get set would probably give you a lot of comfort in doing that, because there's not truly as much thought behind those as you might suspect. But they come in three flavors, these knowledge gaps, and as you pointed out, we don't have time to go figure all that out, right?
We needed that solution last week.
Last week, right? We've got to get started. Otherwise, we're not going to have time for all the rework at the end. So that's one of the things I hear. Well, we can't know all that. We can't know everything perfectly, right? I'm sorry, let me take a drink here. Can I know the mass of this bottle of water perfectly?
Get the right
Oh, I can. Does it matter when I measure this? Right? Because it's evaporating. And there's also, I can feel condensation on here because it's pure. So There is water leaving the bottle, there is water being attached to the outside of the bottle. I'm drinking it. Changing the mass. Doesn't matter where I measure it, right? Because what I'm measuring is weight, which is the force of gravity. Gravity is inversely proportional to the distance between the masses. And so if I weigh this at sea level versus on top of Mount Everest, I'm going to get a different weight, assuming my scale is the same. Which, with what do I measure? Are they always the same? No, there's some error involved in that. Is the mass the same now as it is now? Well, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, no. Because as velocity approaches the speed of light, mass approaches. Can I get a good enough approximation of the mass of this to do probably whatever I want to do? I absolutely can, right? And so one of the things that we've got to fall back on is that everything we know is just some kind of approximation. Okay. And the question is it a good enough approximation? What we're after is not perfect knowledge. What we're after is what Dave Zills, the former retired vice president of Boeing, called decision grade knowledge. All right, we need decision grade knowledge, which is an approximation that's got some factual evidence behind it, from experience or measurement or simulation, or something that we can say, yeah, it's not a guess, it's not an assumption, there's some facts there. And that if we use this approximation in a decision, we're likely not to have to go back and revisit it later in the project. It's good enough, right? To get us a good answer. And I'm going to add one more to it that's not apparent, but I submit to you that for it to be knowledgeable, it needs to be visible. What does he know? What does he know? We can't tell until he shows us. So if it's just, the problem with, people keeping it in their heads and then spilling it out, it comes out of opinion. It's not until we make it visible in something that we can actually properly vet it and have confidence within it. So there's some facts there, but here's the number one takeaway I would like you to get. It came as an epiphany to me after, dealing with risk and management. Knowledge gaps equal risk. Knowledge gaps equal risk. If we knew how it was going to work, it wouldn't be a risk, would it? Now, I'd like you to think a second about what the power of that could be for you. How could you not just manage risk in your project, but as Scott Ambler said, he likes to do away with risk, right? How can you eliminate risk in your project or in your project? Close your knowledge gaps. Eliminate your knowledge gaps, and your controllable risk goes away because you now know within decision grade approximation, if you will, how that's going to come out. Do you know what your knowledge gaps are on your projects? Would it surprise you to know that you already have a list of them? How many people's here process requires them to do a failure mode effects analysis or do some other form of risk assessment on your project? Not many? You don't do any kind of risk assessment? Boy, what a nice life y'all live. Okay. If you switch those from being, okay, I got a risk here, how am I going to check for it? Well, I'm going to put a test in at the end. Well, that's a fine time to find out, right? What if you instead think of those as knowledge gaps and ask yourself, how early can I learn if this is going to work? How does that change you in organizations, do you think? What does that do to your risk profile? What's the burn down rate of your risk? Okay. So I found that to be a very powerful tool, even if you don't do any of the other stuff that I'm going to talk about. The second thing that tends to lead to poor quality decisions is we tend to make decisions serially. It's like when we enter a maze, we come to a branch in the maze. We can go left, we can go right, or we can go forward ahead. We don't know what lies down any of those paths. But we need to make a decision, so we take the most appealing route at the time. Maybe we've run this maze or one like it before, and we know, well, left doesn't work too well, let's take right. But we still don't know what lies beyond it. We take that decision serially as it comes. Well, the problem with that is if we go right, we don't know what left or center would have revealed for us, right? Would have held for us. Is it better? Is it worse? We don't know. Okay. And in the end, unless you really get lost bad, you only looked at a small percentage of that maze. And of course, there's always a chance that you're going to hit a dead end and have to backtrack, right? That's what's happening with these reroutes, right? Work back, firefighting. You're having to back your way out of the maze and find another way out of it. Now, if that wasn't challenging enough, let's give everybody a maze, right? Let's give everybody a maze and let them work on their own maze by themselves. But let's throw a little wrinkle in there just to make it fun. Once I make a decision in my maze, that changes the other people's maze. It opens and closes passages in the other maze. Why? Because our decisions are often interrelated, right? If I change something over here, some option is now no longer available to somebody else. So that ought to be a fun thing to do, right? That's a nice challenge to have. One of the big challenges is that no one sees the whole picture when related to decisions. How one comes, how the other goes. Okay. And of course, it doesn't get any easier the larger, more complex your problem is. So let's look at, those are some challenges just in making decisions. But why are we making them so early in the project? Why do you make these? You try to get some fill in the blank answer on everything on every form, right? So you can get your project plan. That's making decisions. Why are you doing that?
Some groups, they have capitalization issues.
Oh, they need some money?
Well, in order to start capitalizing on the development, you have to have a viable plan.
Oh, somebody wants to know if they're going to get a return on the investment?
Something crazy like that.
Yeah, I know, small little thing like that. So what do?
Lie.
We lied. We got to commit a fraud. Right? So in our processes, typically, we got this situation going where we need a business plan generally and a scheduling budget. I haven't seen one yet that doesn't have that as a requirement in the document. Anybody have a process that don't have that in it? Okay. So you get that approved, and it usually occurs here. Okay, and as we already talked, we're getting these scheduling resources coming in there. And so have we ever thought what it takes to get a business plan together? Well, we need a revenue forecast. Well, to get a revenue forecast, we kind of need to decide on what features and what performance levels it's going to be so we can figure out how many of whatevers we're going to sell. And we need a product cost estimate in order to know how much we're going to make off this, right? Well, to get a product cost estimate, what do we need to know? Well, if you're doing hardware, you need to know what material, what components, how you're going to manufacture it, how many pieces you got in there. Are you using grade 10 stainless steel, or are you using hot metal? You know, you need to make some decisions, okay? If you're doing code, what features are in, what features are out. So, in order to get the schedule and the budget and the revenue plan, we have to design the product. Once again, to get the project approved. What a silly world we live in. Okay? I want, along with Jim, I'm going to bring Jim in here because we both did this. We put in a lot of phase gate processes back in the day, didn't we, guys? Because they didn't exist when we started work at age 10. But, and that was great because it brought some order to total chaos, right? But we got confused along the way. And I'll interject this in here, although I haven't talked about it, because I heard someone speaking the other day about these points need to be decision points, right? They need to be decision related. Well, the original seminal work on the stage gate process was by Dr. Robert Cooper back in the late 1980s. It's titled Winning at New Product Development. Okay. And in that, he actually proposed that very thing, that there are filtering gates to advance product through the design, and there are decision points. And before you advance the product along this process, you should make a decision based on, you know, its viability, goodness, both in markets and technical. And one of the interesting things is this second phase was called planning and feasibility. How many have a feasibility study in your products now, project plans?
For automotive.
What?
We have to do it for automotive.
You have to do it for automotive. That's good. Most don't. Most do not ever consider feasibility anymore.
But I work at TI, so there you go.
Most do not consider feasibility. So if you haven't been familiar with that, it's good to get some familiarity with where it started and what it's evolved to, which I don't necessarily think is a very good place. And I was part of the problem too at one time. Why do we do it this way? Okay. Well, most of you kind of came into it, right? That's the way it is. That's what the process is. Here's our process, go follow it. And also, we got to get started, right? We need to make some decisions so we can get started. Then we got some psychological things going on. We as individuals value near-term consequences more than we do long-term. It's why the shot at the end of the basketball game, hit or miss, seems more consequential than whether they made or missed the same two-pointer back in the first quarter. It's the same 2 points. But it seems more consequential because we're up near a deadline, right? In the game. Okay. And so the consequence of, hey, we got to get this first gate through by such and such a date, we need to get going. So we'll worry about the rest later. Okay? The other thing that's going on is if you survey people and you say, well, you need to travel, make a travel between 2 cities that are a 4-hour drive or a 1-hour commuter ride apart. And it's a dark, stormy night. Would you rather take the small commuter flight on the small plane, or would you rather drive that 4 hours to this one? Which would you rather do? Everyone wants to drive. If you look at the statistics, the safer route is to take the plane. Now we get a feeling of control when we're driving because we have something to hold on to turn and something's fine. We have no control over what the other drivers are doing, whether the bridge is washed out or not, whether the tornado's going to pick us up, spin us around, put us down, put us right back up like that guy in the pickup up in Oklahoma, right? We don't have control over those things, but we feel in control. And that's probably one of the allures of these stage gate processes. It gives everyone a sense we're in control, right? It gives us some feeling of being. And I'm going to assert this. That if you try to assert certainty where it really doesn't exist at the beginning of a project, because you're making decisions off assumptions and wishful thinking and opinions, that you merely have the delusion of control. If you buried that risk in your plans, you have the delusion of control. May feel good, but you're likely going to experience the chaos at the end of the project. So, what can be done about this? How are we doing on time here? I didn't set up a lot, so we've got 2 hours left. Okay. So let's look at this thing that Mike Kennedy explained to me. It's called set-based concurrent engineering. And it's a radically different way of thinking really about decisions. And our normal everyday experience is to, when we're faced with a situation, we hypothesize a solution based on our experience or whatever fact, and we go out and try to see if it works or not. Psychologists have studied that, and that's by and far the most predominant way humans go approach solving any particular problem. Hypothesize a solution and try it. Work really great when you're needing to make a quick decision, like should I run or fight this saber-tooth tiger? Okay. Those situations works really good, okay, because you don't want to be slow of thought and slow of foot, right, in those situations, okay? But as things get more complicated and the information becomes sparser, in other words, less knowledge, it turns out it is not a good decision-making strategy, okay? There's a more common, which is where you actually assemble all you know, and then rather than try to pick the best answer, you actively seek to eliminate things that are infeasible or undesirable. Considering all the possibilities, let's prune away those things that we know aren't answers. Okay, that doesn't work well on those forums, does it? Is there any place on those standard templates in your project plans where how you go about doing that? No, it's a little tougher. It's also tougher to think that way. The set-based and converted, I got a definition here, but it's basically you get to your best solution by systematically eliminating things that don't fit criteria, and you make the criteria tighter and tighter the further you go along the process as more and more information comes in. Okay. So it's converging to something, to a solution, rather than trying to guess it and test it. Okay. And the thing you want to do here is if decisions are connected to each other, if I'm going to explain this in a minute, but if this decision affects somebody else, I don't want to make that serially. I want to make that decision concurrently. Okay? I don't want to do serial decisions. So one of the ways, this is an engineering example, but I think it's the same. Suppose you've got 2 decisions to be made. And you know from testing experience, some data source, some simulation or something, that any combination of decision in A and decision of B below this line is possible. You also know from maybe your requirements document that in order to be satisfactory in this particular case, decision A must be between here and here. And decision B must be between here and there. That becomes your acceptable window, target window, design window, acceptable range of requirements, whatever you want to call it. And our solution set, therefore, is everything that's the intersection of those two decisions. What's acceptable and what's feasible. Remember I said, you know, Mike told me about some way that you could look at all the alternatives and constantly evaluate them and keep them alive for as long as possible and that kind of thing. I felt really silly when I realized that a trade-off or a limit curve contains an infinite number of solutions. Right? Because there are an infinite number of points there. And so what happens if the scope changes on decision A halfway through the project? What if they come back and say, oh, sorry, I can no longer live with this minimum, I need this minimum. How many solutions do I have left? I still have an infinite number of solutions. How long does it take me to evaluate that?
Infinite time.
Does it really take me infinite time to evaluate that if I have this curve?
If you have infinite solutions, it would require infinite time.
Think about what I just did here. I figured out what the feasible space was. I figured out what was acceptable. All I did was change what was acceptable. How do I still know what is the intersection of those two sets? I already know it. How long does it take me to figure that out? Yeah, about enough time to look at the graph, right? Okay. So this is kind of the thought process of set-based thinking, if you will. Now, sometimes those are unique points, but not continuous functions, but the principle applies, okay? And the challenge only is that they don't usually come in A and B's. They come in A, B, C, D, E, F's, and G's, and H's, and so forth and so on. And back when Kurt was working, they would take, transparency film and put it on an old overhead projector, and they would stack up these transparencies, right? And so, if you do that, you then get to say, well, my solution space is anything on this line, in here, in here. Now, if I have done this with approximations, how can I use this to my advantage? In other words, what's the difference between, if all these are acceptable solutions, everything on this black line in the white space is an acceptable solution, what's the difference between choosing a point here and here?
Nothing, because they're both acceptable.
They're both acceptable, except how did I get to, how did I get to this curve right here? And how did I get to that curve? No, what?
Trade-off between the other parameters.
But how precisely do I need to know those? Let's put that back into everything we need to know is only an approximation. If I make rough approximations here, and even on this line, as long as I'm out in the middle here, I'm still good. It's only when I get up next to the edge of the box that I really need to get much more precise in my approximation. So I can use this actually in a back envelope type analysis very quickly, as long as I don't need to be down near some limit. Okay. And then I just need to know more precisely about that one. My approximation needs to be there. Okay, so that's kind of the concept of set-based thinking. That's the fundamental thing that exists in set-based thinking. Okay. One of the challenges, though, is that 99.9999% of all of our education, all of our training, and all of our practice teaches us to look for the one correct answer. Right? Think about the test you took. How many of them asked, give me the range of everything that'll work? Anybody remember that on the exam anywhere? No. They always wanted one. It's easier to grade when you get an exact answer, right? Right. Okay. But real life, it's a little more flexible. Okay. So let me bring this home to some project management. Suppose you're looking to do a budget for labor cost on just one task out of your project plan. And so, a typical thing might be, well, we got the labor cost for this task is defined by the hourly labor rate times the hours worked. Right? Real simple. Sounds simple enough. All you need to know is any two of those and you get the third, right? So how do you get to the two you know? We can talk to you so we can get an answer. But what if you actually have maybe some different resource bases that you can tap? And depending on the resource base you tap for that, maybe they have different hourly rates. And maybe they have an estimate of how much time it would take. It's different than some of the others, right? So, and then let's go ahead and let's say, well, what I want in terms of a target range for that labor cost. Okay. So let's suppose we got 5 potential subcontractors and they've got maybe different labor rates ranging from $20 to $32. And they're estimating, we get them a bid, they say, well, some of them say it could take as little as 30 hours, other of them say it's 500 hours. Okay, we want to spend as little as possible, but really we'd like to spend $900 or less. $1,000 maximum, but I really can't go over $1,000. So if we do that, and we look at all the options there, the interesting, let me change this to this Venn diagram here where the labor rates across those 5 contractors vary from $20 to $32, and the estimated hours from 30 to 50. And then I've got lower is better. I'd like to not spend anything on this, but my goal is 900, and I definitely don't want to spend more than 1,000. Actually, there might be more than one option that meets all of those, right? In this case, the case I just gave you, there's actually 3. Subcontractor A, subcontractor B, subcontractor B. Okay. So which one did I go with? Did I just go with the one that gave me the lowest bid? And a lot of other things, right? Well, it depends, right? It depends on what else is important and what else is connected to. This little diagram here we call a causal map, okay? The circles are the decisions, and the rectangles, we call them relations, but they're basically how each of those decisions affect each other. They're the transfer functions, the trade-off curves, the tables, or whatever that informs us. If this is of that value, what can the others be? And that little scenario I just gave you is in the green here. That's the labor cost for the task in, that's the labor rate, that was the estimated maximum hours that number would be worked, and that was a contractor. So when I decide a contractor, when I make a decision about which contractor to use, I've made a decision about the maximum number of hours I want to be billed and about the labor rate. I've made that implicitly by my design contract. Or vice versa. If I decide on either of these two, I've decided on which contractor I must use. Works on any direction. But it depends on which one I pick based on some other things. Like you mentioned, how good a vendor are you? There's probably some vendor quality in that is eventually combined with a lot of other impacts to product quality that's gonna lead to a total product quality score that eventually lines up being related to the value of the product. And there may be a difference. We didn't even ask the question, when can you start, when can you finish? I've just remodeled a bathroom. The estimate for elapsed time versus start versus finish dates have no relation whatsoever. None, not one. And then that's going to go into your whole project, and that's ultimately going to wind up with the value to the company because it's going to affect your whole project. So the point is, you can't really make these decisions in isolation without figuring out what else is dependent. Okay. This is the map through the maze. This is a graphical representation. We call that a causal map. They are extremely powerful, okay, because you can do them as a team. And I think, I guess it's Scott Amber again yesterday was mentioning that every stakeholder's got a different language. Okay. Here's your Rosetta Stone. Okay. They can all, even CFOs have told me they understand this. That's a major thing. Okay. That's a major thing. When you can get everybody talking on the same language. It's a common model. You can unify and collaborate around it. Now, so that kind of gives us that common view. It's the aerial view of the maze. Everyone's maze. Okay. Now we can take it to a different level. This alone has tremendous value. If you could show people, here's how your decisions are affecting other people. Here's how other people's decisions are affecting you. Okay? That's an amazing thing right there alone. If you make that truly computational in some way, if you can come up with tables or graphs or anything that you can calculate, right? Then you can analyze that network. Here's one from an engineering case. I put that up there. You're not going to be able to read that, but that is for the geometrical and material design of an external fuel tank on the spaceship. Okay, and it considers all these technical decisions against targets of tank volume, payload, weight, cost, etc. The different colors represents different parts of the organization that would normally be in charge of making those decisions. So you can bring that together organizationally to show that. But that's about the general complexity you would expect to see in something like that. Most of you have cordless drills at home. The battery pack. If you just consider the electrical requirements of voltage and current and capacity and the space sizes and some reliability to impact shock, that's about 50 simultaneous trails, technical trails, to give you an idea of what's going on in those complexities. Okay. So if we can take that and we can make that computational, we call it a trade-off now. And I'm not saying that you get there, it actually doesn't take as long as you think, but if you're able to take it to that point, then you can do things where you can actually make visible the trade-off spaces in a number of different ways. Where's that helpful to you? If you could compare feature sets, performance levels versus cost versus schedule, and put that into something where somebody can just take some sliders and move it around and see, what does that do for you? Who would that, what stakeholders would that help you with? All of them, right? In fact, that's generally where we're seeing that used. Because we started off just doing this with the engineering side. Like I said, there's plenty of work to get engineers and marketing to make decisions based on facts, not other stuff. But those companies that were getting benefit out of doing that said, look, we got kind of the same challenge over on the project side, particularly in dealing with customers. A couple of examples was where Air Force One, Boeing's trying to make, get together the refurbishment project, right? Well, there's like a dozen agencies in the U.S. government that's got some interest in what goes into an Air Force One refit, right? For maintenance, from the Air Force, the guys flying it, you got the press corps, you got, the Secret Service, the list is endless, okay? And of course, these projects don't come along very often, right? So what does every one of those agencies do? They pull out the Sears Christmas catalog and circle everything on every page, right? Well, when you add all that up, it really can't be done in any meaningful time period or with anything less than like half the national budget, right? But how do you get those dozen agencies that are pretty much independent? In other words, you're going to have to sit down with the president to get them to all come together. How do you get them to actually come to some reasonable project, right? So what they did was they went out and modeled those feature and performance choices versus time and money using this methodology, and then they brought them in a room and said, okay guys, here's all the things that are possible. You tell us where to put the sliders, right? You tell us where you want it. We can do any of it. And you can see right here what the consequence times money is, where do you want to be. There's another defense supplier that deals with that on RFQs, right? Frequent RFQs, and the process before is they usually have 8 weeks to respond, so they wait till Friday on the 8th week, get in a conference room, argue for about an hour or two, decide if they could do it, and so if not, how much, and then try to come up with some response and do the bid. I see some people smiling. That doesn't happen to your organization. Okay. Once they had that, remember when I asked you about that chart, how long if the scope changed, it would take you to, well, having these networks in this way, they can respond to RFQ in 48 hours, knowing exactly. Now, the interesting says, well, we can, but we usually wait a week. We don't want to spoil them. So they wouldn't trust it if it came back that quick. But they're able to do that. They say, now instead of coming up with some best guess at the end, we've actually got it. And what they're able to actually do is come back and say, yeah, you asked for this. Here's how long and how much it's going to cost. Have you considered these nearby alternatives that are actually cheaper and much cheaper usually and much faster because they don't involve some of the pie in the sky stuff. And often those get accepted. Those counter alternatives get accepted, those counter proposals. And they're able to do that at the same time. So this is some of the ways these things are being used. And I wish I could actually go in and show you these, but obviously all of these are classic. The other thing is that really we don't have time to get into the details of those of how to today. So what I thought I'd do is just kind of walk you kind of step by step, real quickly through the thought process here. If you look at any project, you've got some features and performance that go into the scope. Supposedly that causes some change in customer value and utility, right? And whatever you do is going to change how many tasks and what those tasks are. And it's going to, that coupled with the schedule is going to have some constraints or trade-offs for the resources. And the resources versus time, that's going to go into your customer value and your cost and all that, so forth and so on. And the time, the resources versus what you got to do, that pretty well determines the difference between your start and your end dates, right? That's a pattern. What we really need to know is how to turn those clouds into more definitive understandings of trade-offs. And you do that, and it follows the same thing. You've got a decision about when are we going to start this step, this task, and based on other decisions, you're going to decide when you're going to finish it. That's the first thing, is realizing these are decisions. The second is the time between these is determined by decisions you make about the resources. And generally speaking, there can be other things, but whatever it is, we just got to define what it is that causes the difference between those two. And so now that. And then generally that builds up to some cost. And so the cost, there might be other decisions that affect cost. And you just add those in and just keep building it. What does this depend on, right? And once you've done that, the same thing, you just sum them all up. It's pretty easy with the cost. Value side is a little tougher because you got to figure out what each of these things are worth to the customer. But if you have some means of estimating, well, if I put these features in here, I got this much market. If I don't put these features in, it costs this much. If you can quantify that, you can make some score at least to your customer value. So, if you're able to build this out, generally I think not being done. Probably a team can do this for a project, under a week. You know all this stuff. If not, you can get good approximations for it very, very quick. And if you're able to do that, you can then maybe see your value space, you can numerically analyze it, you can graphically, however you want to do it. When we originally did this 15 years ago, there was no software tools to do this. We did it, printed out or hand-drawn graphs on a large conference room wall with vines connecting it, and big tables and stuff. And it worked. The only downside to it really was you had to have a big conference room for every project you were doing. Because it pretty well stayed up there for the time. Now there's software tools out there that do this and do it quickly, do it more efficiently. But I'll make a note of this. These right here, these causal maps, you'd probably be tempted to do it in PowerPoint or Visio. After years of training, that's what I decided was to post-it notes on flip charts or marker boards and then take a picture of it. Okay. Because you're going to move those things around, right? You're going to move them around, you're going to change them. Because it's kind of a learning process. Notice what we're doing here. We're making a lot of things visible that you think are to keep us heads, right? Here's a report takeaway. I'll just get in here in a slide. Have you ever been in a meeting, maybe a problem's come up, and you got an email alerting you to the problem? Maybe it's at a customer, and you know it's a problem because the email's trailing smoke as it comes in. Alarm bells are going off. And so you gather maybe 6 people in a room, conference room. You throw up the email on the overhead. Maybe it's a short email. This is call it 50 words. Everybody reads it. What's the first thing out of everyone's mouth? What do people offer up?
Random ideas.
Random ideas about what? Solutions, right? And how many solution suggestions do you get? You got 6 people in the room, how many solutions? 6 if you're lucky, probably more likely 10 or 11. And then you're listening to some of these and you go, there's a time I thought I worked with some pretty smart people. Now there's 1 or 2. 1 or 2, I'm not too sure about it. What has happened? What has happened in that process?
Pressure.
What?
Pressure.
Maybe. Here's what I think happened. And this is a hard thing to say, because I kind of had some idea after reflecting on what goes on in my mind. I have no idea what goes on in your mind. But when I get that situation, I'm reading that. And there's words there, 50 words. How many definitions are there for each word in the English language? Most of them got 3 or 4, right? You go look in Webster, and there's 3 or 4 possible things. So I'm connecting that, and what I'm trying to do, I'm a very pictorial person. I'm trying to form a mental picture of what's happening here, right? So I'm taking those words and I'm translating them into some mental picture. What am I using to make that translation?
Assumptions and experience.
What? What am I basing my interpretation off of?
Experience.
My definition for the words, what else? My background, my experience, my knowledge, and I'm forming this picture. What's the chance that my mental picture is the same as the other 5 people in that room?
0.
Yeah, pretty small. What if there's information missing? What do I do? What if say I'm putting this mental jigsaw puzzle together, and there's pieces of the puzzle missing. What do? I just kind of fill in the gap. What if I got some pieces that don't fit exactly? What do? How do I complete that picture? Well, I take out my little mental hammer and I slam that thing down there right before that piece. If I got it's got to fit in there. We lay this another takeaway out. It's impossible to effectively collaborate without a visual model. Because as long as we're all operating off our own mental pictures, it's impossible for us to effectively communicate. That's an important takeaway. Make everything visible. Create some visual model though, where you can all point at and go, yeah, that's how we think it's working. I don't care what it is. It could look like your toddler's picture on a refrigerator door, but it's got to be something that you can all point to and say, yeah, that's what it looks like. That's what these causal maps, one of the things that causal maps do is it gets it out of everybody's head. Because when you're actually creating, you'll find out people actually had different understandings of how things work. Can't imagine that, can you? Okay. So those things are help us. Things that I have heard talked about that I see. When Jim and Kurt said, you need to share this, I said, I don't know if it's relevant. But I knew yesterday I knew that some of this has some potential for you. Okay. That around it. Because you got constantly changing or changing scope and resource level. You got building that consensus, right, with all the stakeholders. And I would suggest that conflict is the result of knowledge gaps. And knowledge gaps may be a result of not having a clear visible model. That's one thing. Scott and we're talking about staying agile in the iron frame, not fixing them. That's exactly what we're doing, right? We're gonna allow those to flow until we got facts, and we can actually want to delay decisions as long as possible. This is counter, right? This is counter to everything you ever know. What's your job is to delay decisions as long as responsibly possible. Scary thought. I don't have time to go into the details of it, but it's extremely important. Here's one that I would like to talk about: auditing the process, right? All that does is encourage you to make a bad decision to fill in the blanks on the forms prematurely. I would be more interested in a practical government of how did you arrive at this decision, and can you prove that it's going to be a good decision? Okay, that to me would be much more proof to us that this is going to work. That is much more important to me than you get a form to that. Eliminate risk, just don't manage it. Okay. How you do that? You close your knowledge gap or create a burn down chart on knowledge gap. How fast that's the one metric that I think is worth anything in all of this is what's your knowledge gap closure rate. By definition, that's your risk burn down. It encourages you to define things, your risk early, and to get rid of them first. Okay. I think that's one valuable. Okay. So can you do this or put some of this to use even if your engineering organization isn't the set based determination? Well, the answer is actually a set of answers. It's yes, maybe, and no. Okay, so let me go through the answers. Yes, if you have an already fairly predictable process. I'm talking one metric, 80+% thing, so that you have decision grade knowledge about how long things take and what you got to do, right? Reasonable approximation. Or if you just want to focus on the macro level, trading off product definitions, your feature sets and performance. Maybe if you are not quite so good and you want to do a little bit of risk management. No, if you're not predictable at all, your rework loops are going to so far dominate your performance that it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how effective you get at executing tasks. It doesn't matter how many resources you throw at it. We can go through the mathematics on it, but until you get that rework out of there, there is just no, it doesn't matter what you're going to do. Okay? And if you got that problem, you're probably not having very much fun. You probably want to talk to them. Okay? That's how it is. So let me finish up here. I don't have any idea. Are we over time? Yes. All right, bye. All right, so here's some takeaways. I don't know if you got some questions, follow up on them sometime.